Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me today, either both in person and those of you online. Happy to be in Bangalore today. It's on. Yeah, that's okay. I think we're not going to do an introduction today. That's okay. I'm Venerable Lekden. I think most of you know me. It's okay. So we're starting a new session. It'll be 5 weeks, I believe, on karma. We just did 4 weeks on death and impermanence, right? And then this week, and then all of the Saturdays in June, will be covering the topic of karma. And they'll all be in person at the center, unless things go, unless the nature has other plans. So there'll be a few different teachers coming in, but we're excited to be able to be in person for the rest of the month, for the whole month of June. So for today, for our first class, let's now just take a moment. Always on Saturday evening, there's been so much hustle and bustle throughout the day, right? Let's put all that aside, bring ourselves to this place, whether you're here in person or you're online. Create a sacred place, a sacred space for you to engage the Dharma, place where you can both study and practice meaningfully. And all of your busyness, your worldly activities that have been occupying your whole day, just put those to the side for now. And so when we have a sense of intentionality, creating a strong space, an opportunity for us to practice, we will set a strong motivation. Right? And we'll talk throughout these next couple of weeks on karma. We'll talk about the reason motivations are so important, because that ties into karma. But we set a strong motivation that the reason we are here together this evening, the reason we are studying the teachings of the Buddha, is not simply so that we might find some relaxation in our life, some calm or some peace in our life. So that may happen. That is a beneficial side effect. The real reason we want to engage in this study and this practice is so that we might be of more benefit to other sentient beings. We realize that in order to be of maximum benefit to others, we have to improve our own minds first, right? And the more we've improved our minds, the more benefit we can bring to others. So the most benefit would be when we are able to become Buddhas, perfectly realized beings. But until then, we continue on the path towards Buddhahood for ourselves for the purpose of benefiting others. So set a very strong intention or motivation that the reason we've come together, the reason we've joined together this evening to study about karma, to study the teachings of the Buddha, is so that we might develop the wisdom and the skill that will allow us to be of more benefit to other sentient beings. So set that motivation very strong. When you're able to really realize the benefit of having that strong motivation sometimes, it helps you engage in things that you might otherwise not be willing to do. Which is to say, sometimes you might be too tired to do something for yourself, but then you say, but I'm not doing it for me alone. I'm doing it for all sentient beings. And that gives you the energy to continue on, right? It gives you a little bit of a boost. And it makes our practice virtuous right from the very beginning. So to help strengthen our motivation, we will recite just a few prayers in the gold prayer book on page 32, maybe? No, 34. We'll recite the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer 3 times in Tibetan, then once in English. Then these other prayers on these 2 pages we'll recite. So part of the reason we recite these prayers is, reciting prayers is an act of meditation, right? It is engaging both our body, our action of speech, and our action of mind, and our action of body. So the prayers aren't mere words, right? We want to have a mind that focuses on the meaning of the words and tries to generate the thought that goes along with it, whether it be generating a mind of refuge or a mind of bodhicitta, whether it be going through the 7 limbs of the 7 limb prayer, whatever those are, whether there be a visualization that we can do to accompany it. Prayers aren't just mere words, they're a way to include all actions of body, speech, and mind, directing them towards Buddhahood. So they help align our thoughts and our deeds in them. Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Tenche Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chiran Soki Chonam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Pincher Sange Drupar Shok Sange Shiram Soki Shonam La Chansho Paru Tagni Kyabsuchi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Drola Pincher Sange Drupar Shok. I go for refuge in time enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And we'll offer mandala offering once in Tibetan and then once in English. So mandala offering, what you're doing is visualizing the entire cosmos, all that exists, and offering it to all the Buddhas. And so generally before teaching, we offer a mandala offering. Often we'll do 2 mandala offerings. One would be to request the teacher to give these teachings, and then one would be to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to request their blessings. So here we'll do them both combined. So this is the short mandala offering. The more common one, well, this is common, but often there's a 37 heap mandala offering. It's a little longer. So it goes through all of the visualizations you're supposed to do combined. This is the abbreviated version. So if you haven't studied it, it's hard to know what you're supposed to be visualizing. So what you visualize here is just, in general, visualize all that exists, all the cosmos, all beautiful, pleasant things that exist. Visualize them as being offered to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, right? However that visualization works for you. Sangye Shingdu Ua Mikte Uai Yokun Amanda Shima Chipai Sho This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niyatayami. And finally, let's offer praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, page 72, or 73 rather, in the Gold Prayer Book. This opening section, where you're actually just praising the Buddha before you get to the other parts, is found in a lot of different prayers. I was thinking of it the other day when I was at puja at the monastery. We recite this, but it's not, the rest of it's different. But this opening section, this praise to the Buddha, is very, very common. This list of different names for the Buddha, because each of them is describing a different characteristic of the Buddha. So if you have a commentary on it, it's explaining to you all these different names mean something different. They're describing a different aspect of the Buddha. So this list is very, very common. You recite it over and over again. Then this particular prayer adds in a small section for the Sangha and for the Dharma as well, for the three jewels that way. But this part is very, very common. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, an incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, so today is our first class on karma, which is very exciting. It's a great topic. I'm really excited that we have the chance to study it together. Very important. It's incredibly important. Looks like the weather held out for us this week, which is nice. Hopefully, it'll be similarly nice on the way home today, but that's nice. So you could say that we have the karma to come together, be here together today. You know, that's how one of the ways karma works. Now, we've been going through different topics on our Saturday classes, right? And we studied previously how to properly rely on a spiritual teacher, and death and impermanence. And these are both some of the introductory topics in what's called the Lamrim, the stages for the path to enlightenment, right? Which is where different teachers have looked at all of the topics that Buddha taught and that he advised us to meditate on and to incorporate into our practice. And they structured them in such a way that we have a meaningful type of practice. So we know what order to study them in, so they reinforce one another, right? And so first, we study how to properly rely upon a guru. This was introduced especially by Tsongkhapa as the beginning, because that guides our whole practice, having a guru that we can rely on. Then generally we study perfect human rebirth. We didn't do a session just on that, but we've talked about it, which we study in order to generate conviction of how fortunate we are to have the opportunity to engage in this practice and in this study right now. So it's making us aware of the opportunities that we have that other sentient beings don't. And then generally after that, we study death and impermanence, which is saying not only do we have this opportunity, but we don't want to waste it because we don't know how much longer we have to make use of this opportunity for perfect human rebirth. So the studying the perfect human rebirth is pointing out an opportunity to us. Death and impermanence is motivating us, saying, okay, now that I know how lucky I am, I'm not going to waste this life. Now, generally, in the Lamrim, what comes next after that? It's not karma. This is a hint. We're jumping. Right. So generally, what comes next is you meditate on the suffering, especially of the lower realms, and on refuge. When they're taught, they're usually taught in that sequence, but they should be meditated on together. So first, you're taught the suffering of the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realm. And then you meditate on refuge, because refuge is the way to be free from those lower realms, right? Having strong refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And having a genuine fear of being reborn in a lower realm is one of the causes that can encourage people to take proper refuge. So that's why they're taught in that order. And we've talked about refuge before, especially on some of our Sunday classes. So we're jumping that module because after that, so that is helping you enter into the actual path of the Dharma, right? Studying impermanence and death actually isn't entering into the path of Dharma, it's motivating you to enter into the path. So when you take refuge is when you actually become a Buddhist, quote unquote, right? So that's the actual entering into the path of Dharma. And after that, so now you have become convinced that you're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to practice. Even if you have difficulties in your life, you have difficult circumstances, I have this human body and I have this human mind that allows me to practice Dharma. And I realize how fragile my life is. It might end tomorrow, so I want to make the most of it. And I realize that the way to do that is to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, with the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha being the actual source of refuge that will guide me to be free from the suffering of samsara. And so then I need to know, what is it I need to avoid? What is it I need to do in order to actually be free from suffering? And that's where karma comes in. That's where we study karma. Karma teaches us what it is we need to do in order to free ourselves from suffering. So Pabot Rinpoche refers to karma as, or the study of karma, or having faith in karma, as the root of all your health and happiness in samsara, is understanding karma and having faith in karma. Because you can have an intellectual understanding of the Dharma all you want, but if you don't actually align your actions to line up with your understanding of karma, it doesn't matter how much you know, right? If you know that being generous is beneficial, be it you go around hurting people, that knowledge doesn't help you. Right? So you need to line your actions up with virtuous karma and avoid negative karma. So what do we mean by karma, right? Why should we be studying karma? And what do we mean by it? I mean, the most important reason to study karma is to understand karma. Studying karma is beneficial in two ways. One, it helps us to understand how we should behave so moving forward, we're free of suffering. But it also helps us give context to our experiences in this life right now. Whenever anything virtuous or non-virtuous happens, whenever anything we have a positive experience or a harmful experience, we can understand where that's coming from by understanding karma. We can understand this isn't coming from nowhere, right? This isn't pure coincidence. This isn't just bad luck. This isn't judgment from some sort of creator being that's smiting us. We can understand the context for our experiences, both beneficial and harmful. And by understanding that context, then we can use them as part of our practice. We don't become overwhelmed by those experiences, right? So really understanding karma, the law of cause and effect, gives us resources to understand our experiences in this life. And then it gives us the tools to know how to behave to ensure positive experiences in future lives. So it does those two things at the same time, okay? So in general, we say the easy explanation of karma is that karma is the law of cause and effect, right? The word karma, in Tibetan, we say le. In Sanskrit, it's karma, which comes from the verbal root kar, which means to do or to make, right? So a karta is an agent, someone who does something, and a karma is a thing that is done. It's an action. So the word karma actually means action, an action that is done. So all of our actions are karmas. They're types of karma. And the same thing with the Tibetan word le. It means an action, you know? Like an office is a leka, a place of action, right? So the exact same word le, or lekum rather. So when we think of karma, we don't just think of this kind of ephemeral idea, right? We think of every single one of our actions of body, speech, and mind produces a karma of some sort. Everything we do. Now, of those, we often talk about how the actions of mind are most powerful because our actions of body and our actions of speech are all either preceded by or accompanied by an action of mind, whether explicitly or implicitly, right? So that's part of the reason we set a motivation for our practice. And we should set that virtuous motivation for whatever we do, because that motivation is going to go along with our actions to make them more powerful, right? Actions of mind are most powerful. So when we talk about karma, all of our actions of body, speech, and mind are accompanied by karmas, and we can't avoid it. We can't not create karma as sentient beings. We're always creating karma. Every moment we're creating karma. So some of them are very small karmas, right, that don't have substantial fruits, okay? And some are heavier karma. They're all different types, but it's not like we can go without creating karma, okay? When you become a realized being, then you create what's called zakme, they say zakme gile. So unpolluted karma or undefiled karma. So that's a perfectly pure karma. That's what the karma in the continuum of a Buddha would be perfectly pure and undefiled, right? So we have zakche gile, so polluted karma or defiled karma, right? But even Buddhists engage in karma. It's just a qualitatively different karma than sentient beings, but it's still karma. We can't avoid it. One of the reasons, if you want to understand why we can't avoid it, and I should say, if you have any questions, both anyone that's online or in person, you can ask them at any time. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. We should, but if there's something I said that's confusing, you need clarification, you can interrupt me, and that's fine, and I will clarify. So we talk a lot about the mind, right? And how important the mind is. And previously, we've talked about mind and mental factors and how there are primary minds and then mental factors that accompany our primary minds. Every single primary mind has at least 5 mental factors that accompany it. So I think of primary minds as like a planet and the mental factors as like orbiting that planet, which is not always the best analogy because minds are formless. So using physical forms to describe them isn't useful, but that works for me, right? So there are always 5 types of secondary mind or mental factors that are accompanied with every single mental action that we have. And those mental factors, they're called the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Omnipresent because they exist with every single mind we have, whether it be a virtuous mind or a non-virtuous mind, whether it be an explicit active mind or a latent mind, right? So the first one of those is feeling. It's the mental factor of feeling. That feeling generally is going to be either pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. But every mind has some sort of experience of a feeling. It's not always a bodily feeling, right? It can be an emotional feeling as well. And then there is discrimination. So discrimination is the ability to recognize, identify, right? And giving it a label of some sort, saying, this is a table. So the mind that perceives the table also has the mental factor that discriminates one object from another. Now, then the third one is the most important here, and this is intention, right? And that's most important because this is karma. This mental factor of intentionality or volition, it's sometimes called, is what becomes a karma, or is a karma. going through the next two, contact. So what contact is the ability of a mind to actually engage in contact with its object. Okay. Otherwise, a mind can't be free floating. It always has an object. A mind is always observing some object. It could be faulty with regard to its object. Like its object may not really exist, right? Like we say the mind that perceives the eye consciousness that perceives the horn of a rabbit, right? You mistake a rabbit's ear for a horn. So that has an object. And that object is a horn of a rabbit, which doesn't exist, but it still has an object, right? So the object of that mind exists, but that object is a non-existent thing. So there still has to be contact between the mind and its object, even if that object doesn't exist. Does that make sense? Okay. And then lastly, there is attention, right? Or focus. So these 5 mental factors accompany every mind, whether it be a correct mind or an incorrect. The important one for our purposes today is the third one, intention. This intention is karma, which is why every moment of mind has an accompanying moment of karma. We can't escape it. And so it's important to understand how the mind works. And when you understand that, you realize if every moment of mind has an accompanying karma, then you realize how omnipresent karma is in your life, how everything you do is creating karma. Many of them aren't very strong. Most of them aren't strong, but you're always creating it, which is something we have to be aware of, right? Now, throughout the next 5 weeks, I'm going to use the word karma quite a bit, we should understand a slight distinction between karma and karmic imprints. So karma is a mind. It's this mind that accompanies this mind of volition or intention. It's not always explicit, but it's always there. Once you create a karma, that karma becomes what's called a karmic imprint. Karmic imprint is not a type of mind or a type of form. It's neither mind nor form. It's something that exists as neither mind nor form. And that karmic imprint is basically, it exists within and accompanies your most subtle mind. And that karmic imprint will go from life to life to life. And then that karmic imprint will ripen into an experience, whether it be a new rebirth or a positive or negative experience in any given lifetime, right? So karmas tend to not exist for very long. Once you create that karma, it pretty quickly transforms into an imprint. But we're going to use the term karma quite often to mean karmic imprint. So when you say, oh, I have all this negative karma I created, really, I have negative karmic imprints, right? That are the result of negative actions. And so the terms get elided sometimes. And that's going to happen in our discussion as well. And you even see it in a lot of Dharma texts. They use the word karma when they mean karmic imprints. So I'm just pointing that out now. So over the next 5 weeks, don't be confused that karma is a mind. We don't have this infinite number of minds simultaneously existing and not going anywhere. Those minds transform into imprints. Those imprints are what we continue carry from life to life to life. And then they ripen when they meet the proper conditions. The karma itself is the mind that only exists at the moment of creating it. And then it transforms into an imprint. For our purposes, it works the same way. But it's important to know that you don't just have this infinite number of karmas always existing. They transform into imprints. We may not say imprint, though. Just be aware of that. And imprints, I think of imprints like seeds. And that becomes complicated because karmic seeds are something else. But I think of imprints like seeds, right? And so once you create this karmic action, you've created a seed. And that seed is going to rest in the mind, in the ground of your most subtle mind. And when the right conditions are there, that seed will ripen, okay? So the seeds are already planted from all of our past lives and everything we've done in this life. Those seeds have already been planted. They don't all ripen simultaneously. So karmas, they say there are 3 types. There's going to be lots of divisions, but karma can either ripen in this very life. So the karma you create in this life ripens in this life. That's possible. Or it's going to ripen in your very next life, or it may ripen in a distant future life. All of those are possible, right? And the reason it's important to recognize that, if you think karma is only going to ripen in this very life, then that doesn't explain why bad things happen to good people, right? Or why young children experience bad things. We'd say those are the experiences, are the results of negative karma, but they haven't created that karma in this life. They created it in past lives, right? Now, generally, we say that if a karma is going to ripen in the same life that is created, or if the karmic fruit is going to ripen in the same lifetime as that karma, it's generally a very strong karma. but it's kind of hit and miss which ones ripen. You can't guarantee. And that's the difficulty with karma. We can talk a lot about karma. We understand karma very well. All of us will be able to understand karma. Yet karma itself and the actual karmic causes and results is the most hidden type of phenomena that exists. It's very difficult to understand at an exact level. To say that this experience you're having in this life is the result of this specific action in a previous life, that knowledge, only Buddhas are able to actually understand that. We say even arhats, people that have beings who have had incredibly high levels of realizations and have been free from samsara themselves, even they aren't able to look at their experiences and know the exact cause of that experience. So karma itself is very subtle, and yet the general principles of it are very clear, right? So we're able to understand the principles of it, but we just won't be able to see the connections for specific results. But we have general teachings, right? So that's important to know. You're going to hear, if you look at any teachings on karma, so many of them would say, it's so subtle, only Buddhists can understand it. Only Buddhists can understand it. That's true. But we can understand the general idea of it. We just can't understand the specifics, that the reason I'm experiencing this is due to this specific action, right? But we do know the generalities that engaging in killing, for instance, has these type of karmic effects. So we know that general links, but just not the specific ones in a specific individual's life.
Would you give us an example of how this plays out from an action to the imprint to how it ripens later on? Or
so we will talk about that a little bit later on. Hopefully we'll be able to go through the 12 links of dependent origination, which explain all that, but I'll give you a brief understanding of it now, is that when you engage, so you engage in any action, you create this karmic seed. That karmic seed transforms automatically into, once that action stops, then that mind no longer exists. That mind transforms into an imprint, okay? So the mind of karma only exists for the duration of you performing that action, right? And now sometimes this can be, pointing out when that happens can be complicated. Because for instance, if I tell you to go kill someone, and then you kill that person, I receive the karma of killing, even though I didn't do it myself, but I told you to and you did, right? So when do I actually receive that karmic imprint? Is it when you engage in the act of killing, or when I told you to? Like, there's a little bit of doubt, right? So pinpointing it can be a little bit complicated. So that karma only exists for a brief moment. Then it pretty quickly transforms to an imprint. And then whatever that imprint is, so for instance, the imprint of killing, if it's strong enough to be a karmic imprint that ripens into a birth in a lower realm, what's going to happen is then in a future lifetime, when I have a certain experience that will ripen that karma, then those conditions cause that karma to basically become activated, and it turns into what's called a completing karma or a throwing karma, and then it bears fruit. And we're going to talk about the different types of karmic fruit that happen a little bit later. So there are different ways karma can ripen. It can ripen into you taking a specific rebirth, or it can ripen in the environment you're born in, or certain things like this. So there are different ways karma can ripen, but it goes through this process. Now, if it's karma ripening into you being reborn in a certain realm, there's a couple different steps that go into that. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the 12 links of dependent origination, which will probably come near the end of these 5 weeks, right? But it all happens on its own, right? Now, thinking of the law of cause and effect, what's also important is karma isn't talking about the worldly law of cause and effect, right? So like if I stick my hand in a fire and my hand gets burned, that's not karma. That's what happens when you put your hand in fire, right? So the worldly law of cause and effect is not karma, but we use it as an example to demonstrate how karma works on a more subtle level.
The worldly law of cause and effect can be a type of karma, because it's also cause and effect.
So if I didn't create the karma to experience the pain of being burnt by fire, then I could put my hand in fire and I wouldn't be burnt, or I wouldn't feel pain, right? That's possible. So so you could say the experience of feeling pain when I put my hand in fire is technically karma, because I had to create the karma to experience the pain of fire when I put my hand in. But in a worldly sense, when you put your hand in fire, you feel burned. That's just worldly cause and effect. If I drop something heavy on my foot, it hurts. Or if you are mean to your boss, you don't get a promotion, right? Like those kind of things are worldly examples of cause and effect that we use them to highlight how karma works, but they aren't necessarily the type of karma we're talking about. You know, karma is still at play. Karma is in play for everything we do. All of our experiences in this life are the result of karma. Everything we experience in this life is a result of karma, positive and negative, right? But the important thing is to distinguish between our experiences of a thing and that thing happening. So for instance, right now, when class started, you turn on this fan, right? And because of this fan, I felt this really wonderful, cool breeze that calmed me down, and it felt pleasant. And I felt this experience of coolness and pleasure, right? And relief from the heat. That experience of relief was due to my karma. The wind blowing wasn't due to my karma. Someone else could have experienced, any one of you might have experienced the exact same breeze that came from this fan and say, oh, that feels cold and uncomfortable, right? So your experience and my experience have the same external cause, but our inner experiences are different. So our experience is due to the karma we've created, right? So everything we experience in this life is a result of our karma, whether that be physical experiences we have or emotional and mental experiences. So everything we do is a result of karma, or excuse me, everything we experience. In that way, you could say that the worldly cause and effect is technically karma in that way. But the examples we give are very gross to help us realize how karma works. So that's true. But I mean, karma, here's the thing about karma, for better or worse, is, so karma, again, it's important to say this, there's no judgment involved in karma. There's no being saying what you've done is good, what you've done is bad, right? But you don't have to believe in karma for karma to still take effect. Like that's the thing about karma, right? Doesn't matter if you believe in it. Karma exists. And whether you believe in it or not, it's going to take effect on you. So in that way, karma is common to everyone and all beings, because they all experience the results of karma. They may not realize it, right? They may put blame somewhere else, but they all experience the effects of karma. But worldly cause and effect is something that is observed by all sentient beings and is shared by all sentient beings. Whereas recognizing karma, especially as we describe it as Buddhists, is uncommon to the Buddha and Buddhist philosophy, right? Though other Indian philosophies have ideas of karma that are very similar to Buddhist, not quite the same, but very similar. Whereas other faith traditions don't have it at all. So in that way, that understanding of karma is uncommon. Whereas you're right, cause and effect is generally understood by all sentient beings. Even animals can understand cause and effect quite often. Sometimes, depending on the animal. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm getting this idea that karma, as it described in the Dharma, is purely subjective. Is that accurate?
No. Karma is objective. How can it be subjective? What do you mean?
Because you're saying it's my experience of something, and it ripens in my mind.
No,
it's not. Okay.
Like the reason you were born with this body is a result of karma. That's not subjective. That's objective, right? The reason you're born in India and the reason you're born in in a specific family have access to certain education. That's all derived from karma.
But the causes of that is in my mind.
Correct. Well, yeah. That you've created those causes. Yeah. And the karmic imprints are in your continuum, we'd say.
So does that mean that we are responsible for everything that happens to us?
Yes.
And therefore we should not portion the blame to anyone else or the praise. So everything good or bad that happens to us is our own making. Is that true?
You are jumping to the end of my. No, yes, that's true. That is true. I'll talk more about that, but that is 100% true. But we have to be careful how we think about that, because we don't want that to then. That is 100% true, yet we don't want to push out on others in such a way as when you see someone suffering, you shouldn't say, well, that's their fault. It's their karma, therefore I shouldn't help them, right? So karma shouldn't allow you to become fatalistic and say, just because it is the result of actions they created, therefore they don't need my help, right? Because at the same time, they've created, for instance, if I've created the karma, if someone has created the karma to be poor in this life, for whatever reason, we can't look at those poor people and say, well, I shouldn't give them food or money or help because they've created the karma to be poor, and that's they're feeling those experiences. Because they also created the karma to be in proximity to others who have the potential to help them, right? That's also another karma they've created. Because it's not like there's only one karma ripening at any given time, right? We have multiple things happening. So yes, though, the liberating part of karma is that we are responsible for our own happiness and our own suffering, for everything we experience. Yet the karmas I'm experiencing in this lifetime, for the most part, I don't remember creating them, right? So I don't feel guilty over creating them, but I recognize that I did do it. And because of that, I don't put blame on someone else. And that allows me to not grab onto that negative experience and then hold it tight. It lets me realize it, recognize it as the ripening of a negative karma, and then move on, right? So I'll get more to that. But for me, that's a liberating part. But if you're not careful, the way you're thinking about it, it can also be overwhelming, right? A little bit. It can feel like it can become, they have this feeling of guilt, like it's all my fault, therefore I deserve this. Like I deserve to feel bad. It's my, you know what I mean? And that mindset isn't helpful, right? It doesn't promote you to engage in a spiritual practice. So you have to recognize that this responsibility that comes from karma is meant to by recognizing that, it's not meant to hold you back, but to set you free, right? And encourage you to behave in such a way as to not do it more in the future. So we'll get more to that. But that's one of the most important parts of karma, is recognizing it as responsibility. So the most important thing I wanted to discuss in today's class is that karma, like I said, all of our actions will have a karmic imprint that is associated with them. Sometimes it's not very powerful, sometimes it is. But karma itself has 4 general characteristics that we can say. That karma always has these 4 characteristics. And these are important to understand how karma functions. The first is that karma is definite. And what that means is, when you create a negative karma, it's going to have a negative result. When you create a positive karma, which we call merit. So when we use the word merit, that's positive karma or virtuous karma. Those are synonyms. When you create a virtuous karma, it's going to have a virtuous result. And so the example they often give is, if you plant a chili seed, you're not going to grow a bitter type of vegetable. You're going to grow something spicy. Or I usually say, if you plant an apple seed, you'll grow an apple tree, not an orange tree. And the same way, if you plant an orange seed, you'll grow an orange tree. You're never, the consequences of a karmic action are always definite. It's not possible to engage in a virtuous action and have a non-virtuous result. Okay, so in that way, karma is definite. Now, karmic actions can be mixed. We'll talk about that. There are multiple parts to a karmic action. So it can have some virtue and some non-virtue mixed together, right? That's possible. We'll get to that a little later. But recognize that it's definite. And the reason it's important to realize it's definite is, when you experience a negative consequence or a negative maturation of karma, there's no doubt that this negative thing I'm experiencing is because I created a virtuous cause in the past. It has to be from a non-virtuous cause, right? And I'll talk more about that. So that's the first one. Karma is definite. The second one is that karma. So I was looking over some other terminology. I'm going to try to use some new terminology for these. I've never used these before, but I like it. They say karma is dynamic. I usually say karma increases. That's what it means by dynamic. So karma itself, once you've created a karmic seed or an imprint, right, no matter how small it is, it's going to increase on its own, both virtuous and non-virtuous. Okay. So engaging in a small action in this life of, making a small offering to someone might have an outsized karmic result. But also engaging in a small action of killing an insect might have an outsized karmic result. Because if you create karmas and you don't do anything to check them, to prevent them from growing, they're going to increase, right? Because they're dynamic. So karma is definite, karma is dynamic. It's always increasing. Now, when you engage in a negative karma, when you do a purification practice, which we're encouraged to do every day, you develop a mind of regret, recognize that you've engaged in harmful actions, even actions you may not have been aware of. You develop actual genuine regret regarding those actions. And then you develop a mind that recognizes those actions as harmful, and you do some sort of practice to help purify them and make a promise not to engage in those actions again. That stops those negative actions from growing, right? So when you've created a negative karma, it won't get too big if you regret it, right? If you nip it in the bud. And the same way, when you create a positive karma, if you then generate this strong mind of anger, that's going to prevent that positive karma from growing. Okay. So both your positive karma and your negative karma will increase, and they'll have results that seem disproportionate to the cause because they're always increasing. But both of those can be curtailed. Of course, we don't want our positive karma to be stopped. We want it to grow and increase and have outsized results. So you want to avoid the things that would limit your virtuous karma, such as minds of anger, right? That's the biggest one. Not the only one, but the biggest one. So that's the second general rule of karma, is that it's dynamic. Now, the third rule is that karma is specific. And this is generally explained as you cannot experience a karmic result that you have not created the cause for. So that's what it means by saying karma is specific. So you will never experience a karmic result if you didn't actually engage in that karmic deed. So if I engage in a harmful action, that can't ripen on you. So if you're experiencing some sort of negative maturation, some sort of negative experience, it has to be due to karma you've created, not karma someone else has created. Okay? So karma is specific. It can't hop from person to person. Now, there is such thing as collective karma that we create together, right? Like if a group of people, the example they give sometimes is if a group of people goes to rob a house, and in the process of that, they kill the householder. Only one person may have done the action of killing, but they all went together to rob that householder, so they all share some collective karma of killing, even though they didn't all do it, right? Because they've created this cause together in that. So there is collective karma in that way. And we generally say things like, all the beings who are born in one particular place share some sort of collective karma to be born together in that place, right? And then when things happen, for instance, the Chinese government occupying the country of Tibet and causing so many problems for Tibetan people and Tibetan culture, the Tibetans understand that as being a result of collective karma of the Tibetan peoples in past lives have engaged in collective actions that have caused harm to others. And so collectively, they're experiencing the result of that. So there is this thing called collective karma, right? But in general, we still have to create the causes for it. So karma is specific. You can't experience a karmic result of something you did not create.
Sorry, sir. So does that mean that there's actually nobody who was an innocent victim? I mean, we often think of people as being innocent victims of somebody else's oppression. And that's how we see it from a sort of, ordinary perspective. But from what you're saying is that karma is specific, and therefore there is no one who is actually an innocent victim, although that's how we perceive them to.
Well, this goes with the point you made before, is that if you look at the big picture, there's no such thing as an innocent victim. Yet in this life, there are innocent victims, right? In this life, they didn't create any worldly causes to experience that.
They're getting it from previous lives.
Right. It's from their experience of harm. So for instance, a small child, or a small child who's harmed in this life. Let's say a small child who's harmed in an earthquake, let's say, not even the act of someone else. So a small child is harmed in an earthquake or dies in an earthquake. They're an innocent victim insofar as in this life, they didn't create any causes for them, right? They didn't do anything wrong. And they probably haven't done any worldly things. Like they didn't choose a house that wasn't earthquake proof, or they didn't do any of these, right? They had no participation in where they lived, how they lived. They didn't cause climate change to cause this earthquake. So in that case, in this life, they're an innocent victim. Yet in past lives, they have created the cause to then experience the harm of this earthquake, okay? But then if you say, well, you're not an innocent victim, what does that mean? What kind of judgment comes with that language of looking at someone as an innocent victim or not? And we have to be careful then by recognizing that they're experiencing the result of that karma doesn't mean they aren't deserving of compassion. It doesn't mean they aren't deserving of our help or our assistance, or they're not deserving of our blame either. So recognizing the responsibility of karma is more useful when you're looking at your own actions than it is when you're looking at others, because it can be very dangerous to then be like, you deserve what's happening to you, therefore I'm not going to help you in any way, right? So it's correct. But the idea of innocent victim, I think, is a very loaded idea, right? When you say there's no such thing as an innocent victim, what do we mean by that, And if that mindset, that means you don't ever help anyone, and that it can turn into this fatalism where anyone can do whatever they want at any time.
Indifferent to the plight of other people.
Exactly. And not only indifferent, but then even beyond indifference, saying, well, you deserve it. You deserve whatever harm you're experiencing, it's your own fault because you created the cause in past lives. So it becomes victim blaming, right? And that's a big thing that happens in a lot of when I need discussions of karma, You say, well, what about a young woman who's raped in this life, who is a victim of sexual assault? Is that her own fault? And you say, no, that's not her fault. That's not the victim's fault. It is the ripening of karma she's created in the past. That's not her fault, though. She didn't do anything in this life that makes her deserve, quote unquote, to be a victim. No one deserves to experience suffering. No one deserves to have harmful things happen to them, either emotional or physical. No one deserves that. Okay? Everyone deserves the freedom of Buddhahood. Right? She's experiencing the results of karma she may have created lifetimes ago, right? Many, many lifetimes ago. So it's not her fault. You can't point blame at her. So pointing it at others can become weaponized in that way if you're not careful. It's useful when you look at yourself, right? That's not to say it isn't true with others, but it's not useful to point it at them, because what benefit is there, right? But when I look at myself, when I experience something, when I, if I'm assaulted by someone or I'm hurt, and I realize that this isn't, this is because I've created the causes for this, then that lets me get through it without a mind of anger, without a mind of attachment. And also, the great teachers and the great meditators, when they experience harm in that way, they actually rejoice because they say, I've created this negative cause and it's ripening now in this life, but it's ripening in such a way that I can deal with it, right? If it didn't ripen in this life, it could ripen in the future in a way that was even worse, right? It could ripen in me being reborn in a hell realm or me having even greater suffering. So even though I'm experiencing physical suffering as a result of this negative ripening, it's suffering that I have the mental capacity to navigate right now. So I'm glad that it's ripening now as opposed to ripening in a different way, right? So the great practitioners can look at negative circumstances and actually rejoice when they experience it. Most of us aren't there, right? Most of us aren't able to do that. But recognizing that, again, we have resources right now as human beings that we won't have in other lifetimes. So having negative consequences ripen now when we have the mind and the intelligence and the community that allows us to navigate them in somewhat of a healthy way is better than them ripening in other circumstances, right? So that mindset saying, I created the cause for this, so there's no reason for me to blame others. There's no reason for me to be mad at anyone else. There's all I have to do is accept that I created the cause for this. And by experiencing this ripening result now, I'm not going to experience it in the future. And therefore I can rejoice that this negative karma is being ripened in such a way that I can deal with it now. And I have enough spiritual practice to not create more negative karma as a result. That's what usually happens. When we experience in the ripening results of negative karma, it causes us to create more negative karma because we get angry, we lash out, or we think, woe is me. We have all these ideas and minds and physical actions that just create more negative karma, right? So right now, if I have the means to recognize that, I can put an end to it, right? But so technically, yes, there are no quote unquote innocent victims in the big picture. Personally, I think that you have to be careful with that kind of language and also that kind of thought process because it can cause us to become indifferent to other suffering. And the whole point of understanding karma is realizing that the best way for us to be free from suffering is to help others be free from suffering, right? And to engage in virtuous actions and to help others. And the fact that, like, for instance, that we are all together today in this room as well as online means we have some shared karma to be with each other, right? And so if any of you are suffering, I've created a cause or you've created a cause to be in my presence where I could help you, right? And I've created the cause to be in all of your presence as well. In the past lives, we've created some connection together. So to be totally indifferent to your suffering is neglecting the fact that we've created causes to become in community together. And the last of the four general principles of karma. So we have that karma is definite, karma is dynamic, karma is specific, and the last one is that karma is dormant. And what that is, that karma will not disappear on its own. It will always ripen when the conditions are right. Until then, it's dormant, right?
Yeah, I think you mean karmic imprint.
Yes, see? So I meant karmic. Well, the karmic imprint is dormant, right? But that's considered a condition of karma, but you're right? Karma doesn't ripen, karmic imprints ripen. But so the important part of that is to say that every single action we do will have a consequence. It may not have a consequence in the immediate future, and it may not have a consequence that we can connect to the action, but it will have a consequence unless we do something to prevent it. So again, negative actions we create and negative karmic imprints we create, we can engage in virtuous activities and purification practices that stop them from ripening. So it's like if you burn a seed, that seed is still there, but it won't be able to ripen, right? And the same thing with virtuous karma. If we engage in actions that are harmful or motivated by anger, then it's the same way that we prevent those positive seeds from ripening. So assuming we don't engage in those actions, those karmic seeds we've created will ripen eventually when the conditions are correct, right? So this is where this idea, the analogy of a seed is useful. Because if you throw a bunch of seeds in a field, they're not all automatically going to grow. You need to clean the weeds out of the field, right? You have to give them water. You have to give them fertilizer. You have to give them sunlight. You have to create the right conditions for those seeds to actually grow into something. And that's the reason we don't experience all of our karmic imprints simultaneously right now, because those karmic imprints need the right conditions in order to ripen, right? Both negative karmic imprints and virtuous karmic imprints. So when they meet with the right conditions, that's when they'll ripen. So for instance, the Tibetans say, if people think that they have a magic amulet and then they go into battle and they don't experience any harm, it must be because of that magic amulet. And they say, no, it's because you didn't have the karma to experience harm in that battle. That magic amulet is nothing but superstition. You hadn't created the conditions for you experiencing harm weren't met in that battle. But maybe the next time you go, those conditions will meet with karmas you've created, and then you'll experience harm. So other than that, it's a superstition, they say. So what's useful about recognizing that is, if we know that we've planted these seeds, then we can actively work to cultivate a field that is appropriate for positive karmic seeds to grow and not appropriate for negative karmic seeds to grow, right? So by engaging in virtuous activity, what we're doing is we are encouraging whatever virtuous karmas we've created in the past, we're encouraging them to ripen. And we are discouraging negative karmic imprints to ripen, right? So we have that ability now. If we don't purify them completely, negative or positive, both. If we don't do something to cut them off completely, then they will eventually ripen, right? But we can try to make the conditions better for the virtuous ones to ripen. So for instance, as we were talking in the last series, we talked about indefinite permanence, right? And we talked about how at the moment of our death, we want a virtuous mind, because that's going to propel us into a positive rebirth. That is the same idea, is you're creating the right conditions for a positive karma to ripen at the moment of your death. Now we've created, if we're thinking about, that's called propelling karma. We're going to talk about that maybe next week. But the karma that propels you into another lifetime, into your future life, we've created so many causes of that in the past, right? I know that every one of us has created literally countless karma that to be reborn in every type of rebirth, all 6 realms of rebirth, countless times. Because we say we've been creating karma since beginningless time, right? So any of those karmas are able to ripen when the conditions are right. And so we want to cultivate the proper conditions to try to push, the karma we want to ripen and get rid of the karma we don't want, which is why we do purification practices every day, because that helps, decrease our accumulation of negative karma, right? And that's why we create strong motivations for every action we do, because that allows us to accumulate positive karma with all of our actions, right? So we always want, if we recognize these 4 general characteristics of karma, that it is definite, that it is dynamic, which is to say it always increases, that it is specific, which is to say that we can't experience something if we didn't plant the seeds for it, and it is dormant, which is to say it won't go away on its own accord. It's definitely going to ripen when the proper conditions are in existence for it to ripen. If we recognize those 4 characteristics of karma, what that lets us do is it lets us explain our experiences in this life, and it encourages us to know how to behave so we experience happiness in future lives, and we don't experience suffering in future lives as much as we're able to create positive conditions, or conditions for our positive karma to ripen and not our negative karma. Now, there's a really wonderful sutra called the Exposition of Karma, very straightforward. And I'd wanted to go over this together in class. I think it's a little bit too long, and it's really straightforward. So there wouldn't be a lot of explanations due. But I encourage everyone to read this if they can. It's available for free online. And if you have questions about it, they can come to the class and we can talk about it there. So
What's the name?
the way you find it online, if you go to the 84,000 project is a project out of America that they're working to translate all the teachings of the Buddha. So you go to 84000.co, 84,000, because we say that the teachings of the Buddha, there are 84,000 teachings of the Buddha. So that's where the name of this project comes from. So 84000.co is their website. And this text is called the Exposition of Karma. So if you just search for it on their website, you can download a PDF of it or an EPUB, or you can read it on their website. So I encourage everyone to read this because it talks about some specific things. You know, for instance, I told my teacher that I was we were starting a series on karma, and the Tibetan attitude right away was the best thing to teach about is the past life stories of the Buddha, the Rapkit, the Jataka tales, because they're in those stories, they say like, you know, he did this one thing and then he was born this way. Like the Tibetans love explaining karma through stories. And a lot of them are like fairy tale stories almost, like it's hard to believe them. But that's how the Tibetans really love explaining karma because they feel like it gives a lot of inspiration. Well, not just the Tibetans, they're relying on Indian texts. So it goes back to the Indian tradition as well. By giving this inspiration so you can see examples of karma ripening as explained by the Buddha, that may not be equivalent to things happening in your life, but it can give you the big picture. So some of those things are in here, such as what kind of action leads to having many illnesses? Anger and hitting someone with the fist or the palm of your hand and so forth, right? So the Buddha is explaining these are the things that can cause these kind of experiences, right? So all these things are in here. It's a really wonderful text. You can read it in about an hour or so, but I encourage everyone to read it. I was going to go through it in class. Maybe I'll pull some parts out of it in the future for future classes, but I won't go through the whole thing. The one thing, they quote, this is part of the Kangyur, which are considered all the teachings of the Buddha. But there's some historical question about that because it quotes other teachings from the Buddha, other sutras. And so it'd be weird for the Buddha to be quoting himself. At least scholars think that, but sutras do it all the time. Sutras have no problem quoting other sutras. So you can take for that what you will. There's a really wonderful quote where he says, long is the night for one who lies awake, and long is a yojana for one who is exhausted. Samsara is long for the foolish, even if they are acquainted with the holy Dharma. So what that means is, samsara is long for the foolish. For those, even if they understand Dharma, who don't align their actions with karma and with the recognition of karmic results, samsara is going to exist for an incredibly long time, right? So long is the night for one who lies awake. Long is a yojana. A yojana is an ancient measure. It's about 1.5 kilometers, I think, or 2 kilometers. Long is the yojana for one who is already exhausted. And samsara is long for the foolish, even if they understand the teachings of the Dharma, right? So we can't do, it's not simply understanding the Dharma that we have to do. We have to then apply our understanding of karma to our lives to make sure we only engage in virtue and we don't engage in non-virtue.
Venerable, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So this question is related with the third general characteristic of dharma, that is karma. That is, karma is specific. So one will not experience the results of karma that one has not created.
Correct.
So if one is praying for somebody else to find relief when he is unwell, then the karma is done by one person and the relief is experienced by another person. How do we reconcile that?
No, that's a great question. It's similar if you're praying for someone who's sick or for someone who has died or any of these things. If I am praying for someone who's sick to get better, I am not able, whatever virtuous karma I create through my actions isn't able to ripen on them. But what I am able to do through my actions is help create the conditions for their own positive karma to ripen. So my engaging in those prayers is helping create more virtuous conditions that can encourage their own positive karma to ripen. You know, if someone is sick and they have not created the karma to get better, it doesn't matter what doctors, what interventions you're going to have. If they've created this karma to experience an illness and they don't have the karma to be free from that illness, then that illness is going to happen, right? It doesn't matter if you have the best doctors in the world or the best monks and nuns praying in the world. You can't make something happen if they haven't created the causes for it. But what other individuals engaging in virtuous actions and praying and dedicating merit can do is help create better conditions for your own positive karma to ripen. So that's what we're doing when we pray for others to experience long life. And similarly, when we pray for our teachers to have long lives, to continue teaching the Dharma, especially if we look at our teachers as highly realized beings who are much more in control of their own karmic maturation than we are, what those prayers are really doing is helping that we exist in relation to those teachers for a long time to continue to receive their teachings, right? So like we don't pray for our teachers to have long lives because our prayers are actually going to make them live longer, though it might, insofar as if there are students that want to receive those teachings, then the teachers are motivated to exist for a longer period of time. But those prayers create the conditions for us to continue to receive teachings from them and to be connected to them, right? So even when, we dedicate merit at the end of every class, and we should be dedicating our merit every day, right? Every virtuous action, we should try to dedicate the merit away. But dedicating that merit, I wish my merit could ripen on other sentient beings. I mentally want to give away all of my merit. I can't actually give away my merit. The Buddha has said, if I could free you from samsara, from suffering, I would, right? If I could give you my realizations, I would. But I can't do that. All I can do is show you how to do it. So if my merit could actually ripen to other sentient beings, then that would mean that the Buddha could liberate us from suffering, and he's choosing not to, right? So obviously our merit can't ripen on others. But what we can do is help create the conditions where their own positive karma ripens. So that is what's happening when we engage in those prayers. And we're creating virtue for ourselves as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned, karma is not all black and white. So I think next class we'll talk more about it, but our karmic action to be complete, there are multiple components. And so just as a brief, again, I'll go into more detail next week, but for instance, when you walk down the street, if you kill an insect by stepping on it, but you don't even realize it, there's still some negative karma as a result of that. Whereas if you see that insect and step on it on purpose, it's a much heavier negative karma, right? So you're still going to receive some negative karma, but there's going to be a difference of degree depending on your intentionality. So in order for karma to be complete, it has to have multiple parts. And a karma can have some virtuous parts and some non-virtuous parts, both. So one action can have multiple results in that way. And so they can be mixed karmas in that way. And we'll talk about that a little more. Sometimes the mathematics of karma can be quite complicated, especially because they can't prove, I can't say, well, this is specifically going to happen, which is why those stories are very, some of the stories they tell in here are very enlightening, because they're stories that come from the Buddha, so we can believe that they actually happened. But then we can't say, well, that exact same thing is going to happen to me, right? But at least gives us a big picture. The reason, one of the reasons it's so important to understand karma is that we say samsara itself, so this experience of continual rebirth, it comes from karma and afflictions, karma and afflicted minds. Those are the causes of samsara. So whenever anything is defined as being samsaric or having samsara as its nature, that means it arose out of the causes of karma and the afflicted minds, right? So samsara itself is the result of our negative karma. So that's why I say all of our experiences in this life, whether they be pleasant experiences or unpleasant, are the result of karma, because samsara itself is the result of karma. Lenyong wangi kiewa. We say anything that lenyong wangi kiewa. Nyong is nyundrip, the afflictions. Le, karma. Lenyong wangi, by the power of karma and the afflictions, kiewa, develops or emerges, right? That's how we explain samsara. Anything that emerges from karma and the afflictions. When we look at the four truths, right? The second truth is that suffering exists. There is a cause to suffering. There is a cessation, and there is a path to suffering, right? These are the four truths that form the philosophical bedrock of all Buddhist schools. So the second one, there is a cause of suffering. What is that cause? Karma. Our karmic acts are what cause us to experience suffering in the future. Right? So it's important to remember that all of samsara is caused by karma. So karma is not just some philosophical idea. It affects our everyday life. And that means all of our physical suffering and our mental suffering, both are the results of karma. Okay. Now, our physical suffering, a lot of that we can't do much about, right? We were born, our karma caused us to be born with this particular body in this particular time and place. So as sentient beings, we're going to get old, we're going to get sick, we're going to die. That is inevitable. Now, we can do some things to make that less awful, right? We can take care of our bodies. We can do some things to make that as smooth as possible, but we can't avoid that. And there are going to be sicknesses we may get that we can't avoid at all, right? People have all sorts of awful sicknesses that aren't their own fault. People get cancer for no reason at all, right? And things like this. So we're going to experience that suffering because we've created the causes for it, and if the conditions are right, it'll ripen. For me, what's more important to think about is the mental suffering. Again, our mental or emotional suffering is a result of karma we've created, but that's something we have more control over. If I experience sickness, and then I also experience the mind that says, woe is me, why am I sick? I wish I wasn't sick. And I'm mad at myself for being sick or these things, I'm creating more suffering on top of that sickness. So the conditions for that sickness to ripen are already there. I've created the karma, I've met the conditions, I'm going to be sick. Now I can either then be upset by it and have all this mental anguish, or I can recognize that sickness as the ripening of karma and then refuse any other sort of mental anguish. So I don't let that experience of mental suffering emerge. I have control over that, right? So I don't create the conditions for mental suffering to ripen, only for physical suffering, which are unavoidable. So our mental suffering, right, multiplies our physical suffering, or makes our physical suffering more intense. In general, mental suffering or mental anguish is more powerful than physical suffering. And where does that mental suffering come from? It comes from our afflicted minds that don't understand the nature of reality, right? So we look at the truth of suffering we talked about last time, or in one of our last classes that I was here. There are 4 aspects of the truth of suffering that come from our own ignorant minds. That we look at impure objects as if they're pure. We accept suffering as if it were happiness. We accept impermanent phenomena as if they were permanent. And we grasp onto selfless phenomena as if it had a self. So these 4 incorrect minds or backwards minds are causing so much of our distress, right? And the 2 that I think are most, they're all important, but the 2 that are most useful for us right now. The second one, we grasp onto suffering as if it were happiness. When we don't actually understand what it means to say we're suffering and where suffering comes from, then we look at experiences in this life, and let me try to explain this. When we grasp onto external phenomena as if they were happiness, right? If I say this piece of chocolate cake is happiness, right? What I'm actually doing is I'm grasping onto something outside of myself, giving it the label happiness, but it isn't happiness. So I'm grasping onto samsara, right? Because that's what it is. And I'm saying this is happiness. So I'm grabbing onto suffering and saying it's happiness. So all worldly happiness, we can appreciate it, we can enjoy it. But if I say this is real happiness, then what I'm doing is I'm misunderstanding samsara for happiness. And if I do that, it's just going to encourage me to continue suffering, right? So we have to find that healthy relationship to look at our worldly happiness or worldly joys and accept them for what they are, but not grab onto them or give them meaning they don't really have. Because if we do, we're going to create more causes for us to be suffering in the future. This is what's called, of the 3 sufferings, it's called the suffering of change, right? So there's the suffering of suffering, which is the core suffering, the feeling of physical pain and so forth. There's the suffering of change, which is when we change from one type of suffering to another, we mistake that change as a type of happiness. So when I was experiencing the suffering of heat and I felt the pleasure of the cool breeze, that coolness is really the suffering of cold. But in that moment of change from the suffering of heat to the suffering of cold, I experienced that suffering of cold as if it were pleasure, right? And if I actually mistake that feeling of a cool breeze as actual happiness, then I'm only grabbing onto a different type of suffering, but giving it the label happiness, right? So I'm only setting myself up for failure. And the third type of suffering is the suffering of all compounded phenomena, which is to say that the fact that we have the capacity to suffer due to our bodies and our minds that are born in samsara, that capacity is itself a type of suffering, right? Because we can't run away from it until we are free from samsara.
Okay, why do you recognize the feeling of relief that you experience from the cold as suffering? Is it because it's temporary and then you want to cling on to it? Is that why?
Well, exactly, right? So the fan is not quite the best example. The better one they give is if on a hot day you jump into a cold lake, right? And if you stay in that cold lake, you're going to experience the suffering of cold, right? But in that moment of change, it feels like happiness, and it is relief, right? Because it's relief from the heat. So what we have to do, what's important for us is, that's not to say we don't enjoy things. You can enjoy jumping into a cold lake on a hot day, but you realize that that enjoyment isn't permanent. It's temporary, because any happiness that comes from outside of you is not real happiness. Happiness comes from your own mind. You create your own happiness through your mental actions, right? So anytime you grab onto anything outside of you, whether it be jumping into a cool lake, whether it be ice cream cone, whether it be a nice car, whether it be money, wealth, a good home, any of these things, if they're outside of you, you grab onto them as happiness, you're definitely going to be, you're setting yourself up for failure, because they're not always going to exist in that same relationship to you. They're always going to change. So what we have to do is, how can I experience this external phenomena, appreciate them, and say, I enjoy cake. That's fine. I can experience worldly pleasure from eating a piece of cake without clinging to it as if it were real happiness, without putting all my emotional investment into this external phenomenon
And depending on
it for happiness, right? Exactly. So then if we can create that healthy relationship, that allows us to live in samsara, have nice things, enjoy them, not be depressed all the time, but not think that those nice things are our happiness, because they aren't. Our happiness comes from our mind. And in the same way, if we haven't created the causes to experience that as pleasurable, it will never be pleasurable, right? My friend, one of Lama Yeshe's and Lama Zopa's earliest students, Dr. Nick Ribush, he's in Boston, or outside of Boston, at the center I was a member of before moving to India. He talks about how in the early days in Nepal, he was at Kopan. He was a monk at that point. He's not a monk anymore. He was a monk for about 12 years. Was he a monk? Anyway, it was the early days at Kopan. So he was in Nepal, and this is in the 70s. So you imagine, Westerners, he's Australian, but Westerners in like really rural Nepal in the 70s, the conditions weren't great, right? It was a lot of giving up a lot of things, of luxuries. And he had gotten a care package from home that had really, really nice dark chocolate and really wonderful dark chocolate in it. And he had this really strong mind of desire for it, because he's like, I've been missing chocolate. This is really expensive, dark, bitter chocolate. And so instead of like eating it right away, he like hid it away. And he waited until he had some free time, and he went away from the monastery into the hills behind the monastery, because he didn't want to share the chocolate with anyone. He had such like strong attachment to it, right? And of course, as soon as he opens it, a bunch of little Nepali boys show up, because that's what always happens. So he's like, oh, fine. And he gives them some chocolate. This is his precious, most like chocolate he's been so waiting for. And they take a bite and they go, and they spit it out. Because, in India, most of the chocolate you get, and in Nepal too, it's like very sweet milk chocolate, right? So there's really strong, bitter chocolate. They just thought it was disgusting. And for him, he tells this story often about how, what you things that are experienced as pleasure for you aren't pleasure for other people. So those Nepali boys, for him, it really is about his mind, and his mind of attachment is how he tells that story. But also, those boys didn't create the karma for that chocolate to be experienced as pleasurable to them, right? Now, we can say in a worldly sense, like we can train our taste buds, right? So if there's something you don't like, you can slowly grow to appreciate it in a worldly way. So that's true. That's the worldly experience. But in general, we'd say they didn't have the karma to experience that chocolate as pleasurable, whereas he put all of his happiness on that chocolate. So seeing those boys spit it out made that suffering even worse for him, right? Giving it away would have been one thing if they at least appreciated it. But he put so much meaning into it. To see them spit it out broke his heart. It is acquired. It is an acquired taste. But the point is that the chocolate itself, there's no happiness or suffering in the chocolate, right? It's what we ascribe to it, both in a physical sense, like what we're used to, but also how we relate to it and whatever karmic seeds we created. Oh God, the same can be said for durian. Has anyone ever been to Singapore or Malaysia? Durian fruit? Oof. Oh. So it's related to jackfruit. So take jackfruit, but then imagine jackfruit that has gone bad and then sit in a garbage heap for like a month and then been mixed with onions. That's durian. Maybe I'm a little extreme, but I've only been to Singapore once, and the smell of durian is so bad that you can't take it on the metro, and you can get fined hundreds of dollars. There are big signs on the metro that are like pictures of durians with lines through them, because it is against the law to take it on the metro because it smells so strongly. But the people that really like it love it. Like something about it just works for them, you know? So you have to have the karma sometimes for certain things. What all this is going to say, right? The importance of this. There's no external solution to our suffering. None. Okay. Now, there are obviously teachings that we use to guide us on the path to liberation. That's true. And we need to rely on external things, such as Dharma teachers and Dharma friends and the teachings of the Buddha to help us find liberation and freedom from suffering. So in that way, there are external things. But those external things are tools that we use, that we rely on. The actual salvation from suffering only comes from inside. There's nothing external to ourselves that will free us from our suffering. Okay? And so understanding how karma works is critical to understanding, because it motivates you to realize my actions now in this life are the only thing that can free me from suffering. Right?
This is so different from religions that posit this creator God or a Messiah who you believe will save you. And therefore, you can lead a sinful life, but if you believe in Jesus and he's going to save you from your sins, and
yeah,
it's so different.
Well, this is where the responsibility comes in, right? Literally just last week, I think I mentioned this maybe last week in my teaching on Sunday, but one of my classmates was saying he had a friend who moved to a different part of Nepal, and one of his other friends met with him, and he's like, "Oh, I'm not a Buddhist anymore, I'm Christian." And he was like, "Why are you Christian?" He's like, "Oh, because then I just have to pray to God, and then I'll be happy and I'll have a good future rebirth. I don't have to worry about anything else."
Because God will forgive me my sin.
And he's like, "What?" And he's like, "Do you really believe that?" He's like, "Well, that's what they say." So basically, he's just being lazy, right? Because he grew up Buddhist, he's culturally Buddhist, he believes in karma, but he doesn't actually want to have to do the work. So he's like, "Well, if I just pray to God, then I'll be fine." No, there is like a burden of responsibility, right? That's why I was saying it doesn't matter if you believe in karma or not. We believe at Buddhists that karma is the nature of, like, karma is real, and therefore it doesn't matter if you believe in it, you know? And once you're burdened with that knowledge, then you're responsible for your actions, right? You're responsible to create the conditions for positive future rebirths so you can become closer and closer to Buddhahood yourself, so you can become free from suffering. You have no one to blame but yourself. Now, that again, that language of blaming, I think, is very heavy language, right? All the suffering I experience in this life is due to causes I've created in the past. That is 100% true. But I am not the same person I was in my past lives. It's the same continuum of mind, right? And I carry the weight of those karmic imprints, but I can't beat myself up for what I did in the past. What I can do is saying, I don't want to continue experiencing the suffering. So I am going to make sure that I don't create any more karmic seeds that can ripen this way in the future, right? So I use my experiences of suffering in this life to ensure that I don't want to continue suffering in the future. And therefore, I'm going to align my behavior with virtuous activities. So
if there is no soul, according to the Buddha, there is no soul, anatta, then what is it, or who is it that is reborn based on the karma? Is it the mind, or what is it?
Yeah. So when we say anatman, no soul, dakme, we mean that there is no permanently existing soul that is permanent, unchanging, and inherently existent. So there is a continuum of mind that continues from one life to the next. So we say there's a very subtle mind that continues from one life to the next. And the karmic imprints we've created are imbued into that very subtle mind.
So it is the mind that is reborn.
So it is the very subtle mind that continues from life to life. And that's how the karmic imprints follow along with that mind until they meet the conditions to ripen. But the reason that's not the same as a soul is the idea of soul as it existed in India at the time of the Buddha and as it exists in other religious traditions is of some sort of permanent entity that doesn't change, that has this inherent quality of being. And we say that whatever we can identify as a self is constantly changing and is not inherently existing, only exists by means of being labeled, right? And let's just say being labeled for now. And so if you want to think of that very subtle mind as a soul, then to some extent it fulfills that same function. It fulfills the function of being that continuum of mind that's going to be reborn, and it is the way that your mental imprint, your karmic imprints continue from life to life. But it does have this fundamental difference from what the way every other religious tradition thinks of a soul, which is why the Buddha is very clear that we say that there is anatma, so no soul. But it's not to say that every life is independent, because if that was the case, then karma wouldn't matter, right? If every life is purely independent, then future rebirth, past and future births, there'd be no connection between them, right? So it's the very subtle mind that continues. We say that that's the proof of past and future rebirths, is that in order for a mind to exist, that first moment of mind has to come from a previous moment of mind. So our body in this life comes from the coarse substances of the sperm and the egg of our parents, but our mind can't come from form, right? Mind can't have as its substantial cause form. It has to have as its substantial cause a previous moment of mind. And so that is the mind, the very subtle mental continuum, the very subtle mind that is going to meet with the sperm and egg of our parents to combine into a little sandwich, sperm and egg with the mind right in the middle, and it caused us to be reborn. So it's a very subtle mind that continues. So, okay, I literally have 3 clocks that I look at all the time because they don't all say quite the same time. So I have to find the average. It doesn't matter if I talk so much that I often lose track of time anyway. I could have 1,000,000 clocks, it wouldn't matter. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, the beauty of karma is that it means you have personal responsibility for your own suffering and personal responsibility for your own freedom from suffering, right? Both of those are important. I think the second one is more important. Well, that's not true. They're both important, but depending on your practice, one of them might be more important to focus on at some times than the other, right? But you have that responsibility. Now, again, that's not the same as victim blaming, and that's not the same as casting judgment on others. When people are experiencing suffering, to tell them it's your own fault, that's not useful, right? Now, it can be useful if they're a Dharma brother or sister, a Dharma sibling, and they are really causing themselves mental distress, and you have a relationship with them that is one where they understand the Dharma, then you can point out the law of karma to them sometimes, and that might be helpful to them, right? But most people, that's not helpful, especially most of our family and friends, if they're not practicing Buddhists, they don't have an understanding of karma. They're like, well, you created the cause for this. They're going to be like, you can stick it where the sun don't shine. I don't care. My mother was sick recently. My mother had cancer and passed away from it. And if I had said, well, this is, your negative karma ripening, that would not have been very helpful. Not only would it upset her, but it just wouldn't have been helpful for anyone. Like it wouldn't have made I was her caregiver through her death process. It wouldn't have made my job easier, and it wouldn't have made her mind easier because she didn't have that belief already. If she did, I know people, Buddhist practitioners who've gotten sick, either with cancer or other long-term sicknesses, and talking about them about karma while they're sick, reminding them of karma has helped them. It's been very beneficial because sometimes when you experience suffering, it's so overwhelming, you forget. The teachings right now, we're sitting here, it's very easy to talk about karma and say, oh, okay, when I have sickness, it's the result of negative karma. Okay. But then when you get sick, it's not as easy to remember, right? Because we haven't really integrated these teachings into our mind yet. They're still at an intellectual level, not an experiential level, right? Which is why we have to meditate on them to make those intellectual understanding of karma an experiential one. So if you have friends who believe in karma, then you can tell them, hey, you're suffering as a result of your karma. Sometimes you can say that. You have to be skillful. That's the important thing, okay? More important is we look at our own experience and our own life and realize that I am responsible for my freedom from suffering. So I don't ever use karma as an excuse to blame others. And in fact, in the West, I don't know if in the West, but in like pop culture, you have this idea of karma. It's talked about all the time, like a very pop culture idea of karma. And you often hear whenever bad things happen to bad people, let's say, you hear like, oh, karma's a bitch, like things like that, right? But like that is not how you should understand karma, right? You shouldn't ever rejoice in people experiencing suffering. That's the important thing. Because yes, them experiencing whatever negative circumstances they have is a result of karma. That's true. If you're rejoicing in someone experiencing suffering, even if it's quote unquote deserved, whatever that means, all you're doing is acclimating yourself with suffering. All you're doing is saying the suffering is a good thing. And so therefore you're drawing suffering closer to your mind. You're creating the conditions for you to suffer more in the future. You should never rejoice in suffering, right?
But you can take it as an opportunity to be of service to them. So,
well, exactly. But this goes so far as this idea of negative rejoicing is the flip side of karma. So, if you see a terrorist who is shot and killed, right? Or, Osama bin Laden, when he was captured and killed, to rejoice in his death is rejoicing in suffering. So you should never rejoice in suffering. Now, if someone is causing a lot of harm to others, you can rejoice that they're no longer causing harm. That's not the same thing as rejoicing in them suffering. Right? So we have to look at karma and allow karma. Our understanding of karma can show us that people experience, right now there are, what my observations would suggest, are some pretty awful people getting everything they want. Look at most politicians in many countries. It seems like there aren't a lot of great people, yet they keep winning over and over again, even though all they're doing is causing harm to others. That's really depressing, right? They've created the causes to experience those benefits in this life, whether it be wealth or power or whatever it may be, popularity. They've created the causes. And what are they doing with it? They're wasting it because they're using those favorable conditions and planting the seeds of suffering for themselves, right? It's like getting all the money in the world and then using it to hurt people instead of help people. So you're taking the result of all this hard work you've done. You planted all these positive seeds. Now they're ripening. You're experiencing the results of positive karma. And instead of taking that to create more positive karma, you're creating negative karma. So when we see people doing that, what we should have is compassion, because we realize what they're doing is creating suffering for themselves. Suffering, maybe not in this life, but definitely creating suffering for themselves in the future. So whenever you look at someone, powerful people, rich people who are harming others, that should be an opportunity for you to generate compassion, right? Instead of indignation, or instead of anger or frustration. You realize they're wasting this potential they have. And that should generate compassion for you.
It not be that they also have some bad karma like me.
I mean, they can.
So the good and the bad ripening together as
I mean, most of us have constantly good and bad karma ripening all the time, right? Like we're not just having good karma ripen. But, for another example, we talk about the 6 realms of rebirth, right? And there are 3 upper realms: humans, demigods, and gods. And when we study perfect human rebirth, we want to be born as a human, right? And not one of the upper realm gods. And the reason for that is the upper realm gods don't experience physical suffering for the most part, especially long life gods, but some of the other realms as well. And because they don't experience physical suffering, they don't have the motivation to practice Dharma, right? And so what happens is they've gone through all these lifetimes creating positive karma. It's caused them to be reborn in a place where they have no physical suffering. They have all these experiences of worldly bliss, of physical bliss, of mental bliss. And then at the moment of their death, they've exhausted all their positive karma. They haven't done any spiritual practice. And as a result, they're reborn in the lower realms because they've taken all that good karma and thrown it away, right? It's ripened on them, but they haven't used it. It's like, they say, it's like going to an island full of jewels and returning empty-handed. So we look at sentient beings who are experiencing the ripening of positive karma in this lifetime, whether that be they have good health, they have good intellect or education, they have good conditions, they have popularity. But then instead of using that to make some sort of spiritual progress, which would be by helping others and by doing some sort of inner work, they're using it to hurt others or to cling more tightly to their own wealth, then they're causing causes for suffering. So I'm sure they have some experience of negative karma ripening that we don't see, right? I mean, whenever, yeah, I don't want to project onto what other people experience because I don't know their minds. But, you know, you look at politicians who are angry quite often and they feel like they're victims all the time, right? And they feel like they're being attacked, at least Western politicians. And that is their experience of negative karma ripening, right? But it's because they cling to ideas of popularity as being power and happiness that cause them to have that that result. But it is negative karma ripening. But for most of them right now, more virtuous karma is ripening and they're wasting it. So instead of looking at them being angry, now again, that shouldn't, this is important too. If I look at the political situation in the US and I see that there are powerful people causing problems for many others, and I say, well, by doing that, what they're doing is creating more suffering for themselves in the future. That doesn't mean I shouldn't oppose their actions. If I have some means to fight against their actions in a virtuous way, right, without anger or without violence, but I can oppose the actions of the people in power that are hurting others, I should do that. Even if, so karma doesn't excuse me, it doesn't allow for indifference. That's what it's coming down to. Mm-hmm. Karma is not indifference. Karma is not, how do you say? Karma is not apathy, sure. There's a word, it's not there. Apathy is close though, but karma should always be active. Or excuse me, karma is always active. Our understanding of karma should also be active, right? We shouldn't just be apathetic to say things are going to happen the way they're going to happen because I've created the karma. Because we're in control of our experiences in this life. Like we can't control what happens, but we control how we relate to it. And we can help create the conditions for positive karma to ripen. So it's not like we have no power, right? It's not like we're just stuck experiencing things and not having any control. We can do something about it.
But at the macro level, if the issue is a very big issue at the macro level, what can we do at the micro level? I mean, you're saying like the political system in a certain country. Now, an individual can't do very much, but at the micro level, what can he or she do to change things at the macro level?
So, at the important thing is to understand what do we expect to change as a result of our actions. So do I believe in a worldly sense that me, voicing my opposition to inhumane government policies is going to cause those policies to change? Probably not, right? But at a micro level, what I'm doing is making sure my actions align with virtue and align with bodhicitta. I'm creating the conditions for myself to continue on a path towards freedom from suffering. And as I do that, I am creating the conditions to help relieve suffering from others. Now, on a worldly level, anyone that does activist work or activism work will tell you that every single drop in the bucket is how a bucket gets filled. So any individual in a community is not going to be the one, it may not be the person to stop something from happening, but that is how things change, is by being part of a community. And you can't allow yourself to say, well, I'm not important enough, my voice isn't loud enough. Everyone has to contribute however they're able to. Now, not everyone has the means to contribute in the same way, right? So some people aren't able to engage in physical activity. They don't have money to offer to causes. They can't support nonprofits, but they can engage in internal work, right? To help align their mind with happiness, with virtue, and they can ensure that they themselves aren't generating any negative karma in relation to that, right? There are some, the Buddha said that all students can kind of be divided into one of three categories. Usually it's a mixture, but there are some students who are very much, the way they practice Dharma is through study. And there are some that the way they practice Dharma is through meditation. And there are some that the way they practice Dharma is through service, right? And so for most students, you're going to find one of those three you might be dominant in, right? But so there are some people who the way they can help others, the way they can be of most benefit to others is by going to a cave and meditating by themselves. Like there are some individuals where they are in their spiritual journey, that's the way they can be of most benefit, right? Because if they get closer and closer to Buddhahood, it gives them more resources to help others in future lives, right? So we have to see what resources do I have, both physical resources and mental and emotional resources, and how can I use them to help others? And it may not be at a macro level. There may not be anything I can do at a macro level, but if I can help one person, then that is beneficial. Because if we think of the law of karma, small actions have outsized results, right? My small action can have a much bigger result. And we can see that, in the worldly example we give is the seed of a tree is this big, it's tiny, yet it grows into a giant tree, right? A small seed can have a very large result if the proper conditions are there. So what our responsibility is to plant as many of those seeds as we can and to create the conditions for those seeds to thrive and prosper as best they can. And depending on our circumstances, then in the our worldly sense, what we can do is going to be different, So for instance, me being in India right now, I'm here on a student visa. So if I engage in any sort of political protest, my visa can be revoked like this, you know what I mean? So that's a difficulty sometimes with our protests, even at the monastery, against the Chinese government and against things like this. Those of us that are here on student visas have to avoid those, right? Because sometimes newspapers come and take photos and we can't be involved in it, even if we want to, because for me right now, being at the monastery is more important. And that could be taken away if I engage in these worldly things. So I have to be careful about what my external actions are, right? So in the same way, we say, what can I do right now that I have the resources to? Both the emotional and physical resources, and how can I use them to the best of my ability? Karma only ripens depending on conditions. So we have to do our best to create the conditions for positive karma to ripen in this life and in future lives. And part of that is being aware of how small actions can have outsized consequences. Another example I often give, if you engage in meditation practice, we talked about the meditation posture, and what a lot of times we're encouraged to put our hands on our knees, right? Or just where they naturally fall. So if you sit for a moment and put your hands where they naturally fall, it'll be different places for different people. Now, move your hands just a little bit forward like this, right? Doesn't feel like a big difference. But sit that way for an hour, and you're going to have a lot of pain right here. Move your hands just an inch backwards, same thing, right? That small action can have a huge consequence on the way your body feels an hour later. But it's only an inch or 2 inches. It's not a big difference. But sometimes very small actions have very big consequences. We can see that in this life. So of course it's the same for karma. We have to be aware of it. So going forward, in the next couple of weeks, we'll continue talking about the different types of karma, the different types of karma, the different type of karmic results. We're going to talk about the ways that karma can be both black or white or mixed, is how it's referred to. So virtuous, non-virtuous, or mixed. Then we will talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions, which is the heart of studying karma. Is if we understand karma, then what's the point of that? Well, what actions should we avoid? So we'll talk about those 10. I'm sure you've heard the list before, but we'll talk about it. And then hopefully we'll have time to talk about how a complete karmic action can result from all those 10, right? So anyway, we'll go into more detail with all that. What else do we talk about?
12 links.
12 links, hopefully. I think having 5 weeks to study karma is going to give us enough time to go over a lot of things. But the point of all of this is that we should make our understanding of karma infiltrate our everyday life, right? If we only understand it in an intellectual way, that's not very helpful, So we need to study karma in such a way that allows us then in our life to actually incorporate those intellectual understandings into our experience, right? And I'll say from my, I've only been studying the Dharma a little over 2 decades. Not much over 2 decades. I think 24 years I've been practicing. And in that 24 years, there are a few moments where I experience, especially really strong sickness or pain or some sort of physical distress. And I've been able to be like, well, this is a result of my karma, and not be overwhelmed by it. Okay. A few moments like that. More moments where I experience great distress and then later be like, oh, okay, and then I calm down. So like I still go up, but then I catch it and calm down, right? The more you are able to meditate on karma and how karma works, then you make it inseparable from your mind. And then you give fewer and fewer opportunities for your mind to run out of your control. And you naturally create more conditions for positive karma to ripen. So all of these things work together. So everything we're going to study together today and the next 4 weeks is trying to encourage us to not understand karma simply intellectually, but to experience it in a more innate way. Right? To understand it emotionally and experientially through meditation and through practice, to incorporate our intellectual understanding into our everyday life. And so I encourage you over the next 4 weeks to, if you have any questions about how this is useful, like what am I supposed to do with this knowledge or information? Bring that to class, right? That's what we want to do. Is say, why are we even bothering studying this? Like, how is this actually going to be employed in our lives? I really want you to wrestle with that. And then bring it to class so we can talk about it and try to find a way to say, what's the point of doing this? Just adding to our intellect isn't very helpful, right? It has to be something that's useful for our lives.
I'd like to cite an example of my own life. I had a very troubled relationship with my elder brother, who was very mean to me when I was young. We were both in boarding school, and he really ragged me terribly and very vicious. And I had a very strong resentment against him for a long time. And I used to blame him for being so cruel to me. And I used to hate him, intensely hate him. But now, if you look at it from the karmic point of view, if I tell myself that actually, well, this is a result of some action that I did, whether in this life or a previous life, then I wouldn't blame him and I wouldn't cling on to the hatred for him. I might, introspect and say, he's not at fault. It's coming back to me because maybe I did something to him in some previous life, and then I would be liberated from the hate that I've felt for him. So for me, it's a liberation to realize that he's not the cause for what happened to me through him. He was just an instrument for this to happen to me. And if I think of it in those terms, then I would be free from the resentment that is harming me.
Well, that resentment doesn't harm him at all, does it?
It doesn't harm him.
It doesn't do anything to you. It just harms you. So whatever you need to do to be free of that is useful, right? Shantideva says, when someone beats me with a stick, I should just as blame the stick as much as I should blame them. Why am I angry at them for beating me with the stick, but I'm not angry at the stick? The stick is the one causing me actual pain. They're just wielding it. And yet I'm not angry at the stick, I'm angry at them. Both of those things would be foolish. I should be recognizing that experience of them beating me with a stick is because of causes I've created. Right? So as you're saying, usually it's going to be previous lives. Right? Usually. Most of our karmic experiences in this life are due to previous life. Just if you look at, the sheer numbers alone, we say we've had countless lifetimes of accumulating karma. We say that I've had, if the skeletons of all my past lives were put into a pile, it'd be larger than a universe full of Mount Everest, right? So I've created so much karma in the past, and if I haven't done the work to purify that negative karma, then of course it's going to ripen. It could be from this life, most likely from a past life. Right. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter though. Right. It's kind of inconsequential because either way, I have to experience the results of it. Whether I remember creating that karma or not, I have to experience the results of it. Now, there's this thing that I like to call the Bodhisattva paradox, which for me, we said that only I can become a Buddha. Like only I can relieve my own suffering and bring myself to Buddhahood. Yet, as someone who practices the Mahayana, who tries to develop a mind of bodhicitta, I also believe it's my responsibility to free all other sentient beings from suffering. So I know that I can't actually free them from suffering. It's not possible. But I take that as my responsibility. And at the same time, say no one can free me from suffering except for me, myself. Right? So I call that the Bodhisattva paradox. It's just similar with karma, where we say, if someone's beating me with a stick, I've created the karma for me to experience their aggression because I harmed them in the past. But also, right now, I'm the result. They're creating more negative karma by beating me, right? By expressing anger and violence towards me. So I'm also the cause of them creating negative karma in this life.
for themselves.
Yeah, right. And now we could say that that only is useful for me. Like I can't look at other people and push that onto them, right? Because if I'm beating you with a stick, I can't say this is your fault. I'm creating negative karma, but it's your fault. No, no, no. It's still, you always have to say like, this is my responsibility, right? Karma comes down to individual responsibility. But Bodhicharya Vitara, Shantideva's famous text, says that when I create the causes for other people to express harm towards me and violence towards me, I'm actually causing them to create negative karma, right? My negative karma causes them to create negative karma. And therefore, it creates this really non-virtuous feedback loop that just doesn't go anywhere good. So therefore, by purifying my own negative actions and by assuring that my actions only align with virtue, I don't create the conditions where other people can then create negative karma. Because if I haven't created the karma to be beaten by a gang of hoodlums, then those gang of hoodlums won't create the negative karma of beating me because I haven't created the conditions for it to happen, right? Now, again, I think of this kind of in that same vein as the Bodhisattva paradox, because if you take this too far, you can kind of put the blame on others in some ways that aren't useful. But it's always about your own responsibility and saying that it's my responsibility to do the best I can to be of service to others and to free myself from suffering as part of that process. Maybe we'll look at some of the Bodhicharya Vitara, because they have in their section on anger, the 6th chapter on patience, which is the perfect antidote or the strongest antidote to anger. They talk about the ripening of karma. So we'll see. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I think that's all I have for today. Are there any other questions for this first class? Anything we want to talk about?
How much of that is by karma?
Your actions?
How much of what happens to us, how we experience things from the outside is ruled by karma, but I guess how we react is not.
Yeah, so everything you experience is a result of karma. Both your inclinations to relate to it in one way or another and experience it as pleasant or unpleasant, but the actual physical things happening are also karma, right? So everything is karma.
Then it's mental and physical.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll talk a little bit more about the different types of karmic results. But so one type of karmic result is determining what type of rebirth you have. Another type is going to determine, what environment you're born into, what your circumstances are. And so all of your ripening, all of your experience could be the result of karma. There's a story in this text about a monk who, is he a monk? Yeah, it was a monk who had generated the karma to be reborn in a certain type of hell realm where his head kept getting like cut open over and over again. But then because of a certain action he had done, it tells the whole story there. But then he died without that karma fully completing. So he was born as a human, but the karma to experience that hell realm hadn't been fully exhausted. So he experienced debilitating migraines. And that was that karma that could have been causing him to be reborn in a hell realm, experiencing this really awful hell realm suffering, but instead ripening as a human as the debilitating migraines, right? So it was the karma hadn't been completed, but his lifespan in the hell realm had completed, even though the karma hadn't completed. So then his experience of migraines were the result of negative karma he had created that could have been causing him to be reborn in a hell, getting his head cut over and over again by a blade that was just spinning over his head just for the purpose of cutting it, or it was experienced as migraines when he's reborn as human. So all of your experiences are a result of karma, right? Now, in that story, since he knew that those migraines were the result of negative karma, and he realized that this negative karma could have ripened as him being reborn in a hell realm, which would be much more egregious suffering, then even though those migraines may have been debilitating, they didn't generate any negative minds, any negative reaction, right? He just accepted that physical suffering and rejoiced that that negative karma was ripening in such a way that he was able to experience it as a human, and because it could always have been worse, basically, right? So no, everything we experience is karma. But again, that shouldn't mean that we are that we don't work for our own benefit in this life as well, right? If you say, well, I don't have to work hard. If I'm going to get that raise or not get that raise, it's up to my karma. So whatever happens is going to happen, right? No, like I don't have to study for my exams. If I have the karma for an A, I'm going to get an A. That's not, you also have the karma to like study. You know what I mean? So we have to do the work in this life in worldly sense as well, right? Because again, karma only ripens when the conditions are right. So you might have the karma to receive that raise and the karma to be fired. And those are going to depend on if you create the conditions for you to be right, to be receiving a raise or to be fired. So those conditions are worldly activities you do in this life that then create certain karmas to ripen, you know. But if you've never created the karma to get that raise, then no matter how much you suck up to your boss, you just may never get that raise, you know. So, you know, hopefully in the past you've created the right karma to be.
You know, a wonderful aspect of bringing in the karma to explain things is that otherwise the world seems so random. You know, things seem to be happening at random and you're so uncertain about what might happen, you know, the next moment, and you don't have any explanation for it. So everything seems so chaotic.
Yeah.
But when you bring in the karma theory, then you think that there is an underlying logic behind this, the apparently chaotic happenings in the world.
Well, exactly. That's one of the most important parts of understanding karma, is that everything feels chaotic, right? Because we can't see all the strings connecting everything, but we have confidence through our minimal experience. If we have a minimal experience that allows us to have conviction in karma, then even though we experience them as chaotic, we can have understanding that there is an underlying nature, as you said, and that can encourage us to not become disillusioned or down-spirited, and then also to not give up, right? And not to give up hope, and not to just become nihilistic in some ways, right? So that is karma is also hope.
Does it mean that karma we could accumulate in different realms as well?
Yeah.
As ambiguous, as ambiguous. So any of that can sort of mature in any realm, or those conditions only are that?
There are some karmas you create that would only be experienced in very specific conditions, such as in a certain realm. But most karmas you create can be experienced one way or another in different realms, depending on what conditions are appropriate for them to ripen. They'll ripen differently, right? So sometimes you create karmas that if you engage in a negative action, but then you immediately regret it, and you immediately do some sort of purification practice, you've created a small negative action, a small negative karma, but you've nipped it in the bud really quickly. So then the conditions necessary for that to ripen, it might ripen as you experience something really awful, but very momentary, right? So then depending on those conditions, it could be in one type of rebirth or another. So sometimes they talk about how, again, in that sutra I suggested, there are conditions you can create karma that would cause you to be reborn in the hell realm, but only for a moment, right? So the karma would have to ripen as you being reborn in a hell realm. But because of this other aspect of it, such as you immediately regretting it or whatever, then it has to ripen as you being reborn in a hell realm, but only for a brief moment, you know? So there are different types of karma like that. Which is why when we do our purification practice, you know, hopefully we'll have time to talk about the 4 opponent powers and how to purify negative karma as well. We have to bring to mind that if I've been existing in samsara since the beginning of this time, following the self-grasping and self-cherishing minds over and over again, indulging my own desire and attachment, then I've created countless negative karmas in past lives that I don't have any memory of. So I have to do my best to generate a genuine mind of regret for those past negative actions and try to purify them, even if I don't remember them, because most of my negative actions I don't remember, right? And then if I can actually purify them, then those karmas won't ripen, no matter what conditions come about, right? So that's the importance of doing purification practice. So we'll talk about that a little bit in this class as well.
But it's only human beings who can create karma because they have free will. What about animals?
No, everyone creates karma. All sentient beings create karma.
But they don't have free will, or they don't have an intellect through which they can decide to do good or bad. So
right. So that is why I said to create karma, there are different parts of it to be a complete karmic act, right? So you don't have to understand that what you're doing is harmful for it to be harmful, which is one of the reasons we want to avoid being reborn in the lower realm so bad. So it's so important not to be reborn there, is because, as you mentioned, they don't have the intellect to avoid negative actions. So they just create more negative karma, and it becomes a negative feedback loop. And it's very hard to escape from the lower realms when you're born there. You were born there often for eons, over and over again, because you don't, as you said, like they don't have the intellect to avoid engaging in negative actions, right? So like, you know, some animals only exist by killing other animals and eating them. Like that's the only way they can exist. And that always is going to be creating more and more negative karma, right? So the type of negative karma they create, the weight of it is different than the weight that humans create because we have the capacity to understand things, but all sentient beings create negative karma. Because if they didn't, then they'd just be free from samsara. Because again, samsara comes from our karma.
So how can they be released from the lower realms if they aren't able to go against their nature?
Yeah, well, hopefully, the way sentient beings are released from the lower realms is, again, they've created some karma in the past to be reborn in the higher realms, right? As we all have. And so eventually, when certain karmas of theirs, especially whatever karma has caused them to be reborn as let's say, an animal, when that is exhausted, then at the end of that life, if a karma to be reborn as in a human, let's say, ripens, then that's how, you know. So that karma to be reborn as an animal has to be exhausted. And then previous karmas they've created in other lifetimes to be reborn in the upper realm have to ripen at the right time. But again, it's hard. It's more difficult. Like they're stacking the odds against themselves, which is why you want to do the best you can now to create as many positive seeds as possible and to uproot as many negative seeds to give yourself as good odds as possible. Again, though, and this is the important thing, we do that not because we want happiness for ourselves, but because we realize if I want to be of service to others, that's the way I can do it. Me being reborn in a lower realm isn't going to be much help. Like I can't help others that way. Though I will say, my mood is uplifted by my puppies quite often. So they do help me, but in very worldly, temporary ways only.
Venerable?
One of my puppies is sick right now, so yeah.
Venerable, just one. Earlier you had said that karma has to be active, it cannot be inactive. It should not be apathy. It's not apathy, you're searching for a word. So is it the word pacifist, that karma should not be pacifist?
No.
Apathetic.
Wait, I said it on apathetic. A passive, it shouldn't be passive. Pacifist, I mean, I don't know if karma can be pacifist or not. We can be pacifist, but karma isn't passive. Karma is not passive, right? Karma is active. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at. And that if karma is always active, then we have to be active in response to it. That we shouldn't allow karma as an excuse to then not engage in virtuous behavior when that opportunity arises. Okay, we have gone long, so let's call it a day for now. Let's complete our practice today by dedicating any merit we've accumulated. So recognize that we have created some positive karma by coming together today, by studying the teachings of the Buddha, by trying to learn about karma, the law of cause and effect, and how it can affect our lives and lead us out of suffering, how it can give us the opportunity to be of more service to other sentient beings. So by engaging in this practice together today, we have created some merit, some positive karma, and we dedicate that merit. We wish that it would ripen on other sentient beings, that they might experience happiness, that karma may ripen in such a way that we become Buddhas more and more quickly, so that we may be of most benefit to other sentient beings as quickly as possible. So we'll do quick dedication prayers on page 36 of the Gold Book. We'll do the 2 dedication prayers, and then the long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama, all in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all sentient beings, without exceptions, into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really glad that I had the chance to begin this series with you. So I will be here next week. And then 3 weeks after that, there'll be one will be Venerable Gache, one will be Venerable Keldenla, and then and me as well. So all the next 4 Saturdays be in person as well as online to study karma. So I encourage you to read that sutra and to generate any thoughts or questions and bring them to class together.
Can you repeat the name of the sutra?
Yeah. So the sutra is called the Exposition of Karma.
Exposition.
The Exposition of Karma.
84,000.
CO. Yeah. Yeah. If you just search for karma, you'll probably find it.
Venerable Lekden, if there's time, could you, one of the teachings, could you lead us through like meditation on karma?
A meditation on karma.
Like
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah, we can do that. We can
If
find
there's
time for a minute. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's good to mention those things now so we can try to plan it in. Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
And if anyone interested, tomorrow we have class at 10 a.m. for a general class.